It doesn't start with fireworks or a sudden confession. It starts with a quiet moment you almost miss, a pause where something inside you finally exhales. This Valentine doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives honestly, as if the confusion that's been sitting between you and your soulmate has grown tired of hiding and decided it's time to be seen for what it really is. For a long time, both of you have been living in questions. Not the kind of questions you ask out loud, but the ones that live in the background of your thoughts. The kind that show up late at night or in the middle of an ordinary day when something small reminds you of them. Questions like, what are we really doing? Why does this feel unfinished? Why do I feel close even when there's distance? Those questions didn't come from nowhere. They came from two people feeling something real but being unsure how to hold it without breaking themselves or each other. Confusion was never about lack of feeling. It was about too much feeling meeting too much fear at the same time. This Valentine marks a shift in that balance. What's changing now isn't that suddenly everything makes sense. It's that the confusion no longer feels necessary. It's starting to feel like a layer that's ready to be peeled away, not because someone forced it, but because both of you are finally ready to see what's underneath. Underneath the confusion has always been clarity trying to emerge. Your soulmate has been feeling this too. There's been a growing restlessness in them, not the anxious kind, but the kind that comes when you're tired of circling the same emotional questions without answering them. They've noticed how pretending not to know feels heavier than admitting that they do. They do know. They know what they feel, even if they haven't always known what to do with it. They know that what exists between you isn't casual, isn't random, and isn't something that can be reduced to convenience or timing alone. What made things confusing before was the gap between feeling and action. That gap existed because both of you were protecting something. Protecting yourselves from disappointment. Protecting the connection from being mishandled. Protecting old wounds from being reopened too quickly. Protection often looks like hesitation. Hesitation can be misread as uncertainty, but in this case, it was care that didn't yet know how to move forward safely. That's why this Valentine matters. It's not about romance as a performance. It's about emotional truth finding its footing. This Valentine doesn't ask either of you to rush. It asks you to be honest. Honest about how long this confusion has been sitting with you. Honest about how much energy it's taken to manage feelings instead of acknowledging them. Honest about the fact that pretending not to care hasn't actually made anything easier. Your soulmate has reached that honesty internally. They've been reflecting on how often they tried to simplify what they felt, to tell themselves it wasn't that deep, that it would pass, that time alone would resolve it. But time didn't dissolve the feeling. It clarified it. Clarification doesn't come all at once. It comes in moments, like realizing that certain songs hit differently now, that certain silences feel louder, that certain conversations replay in your mind not because they were dramatic, but because they were meaningful. Meaning has weight. And weight demands acknowledgement. This Valentine brings that acknowledgement closer to the surface. Not as pressure, but as readiness. A readiness to stop hiding behind ambiguity. A readiness to let the connection be what it is, even if that means stepping out of emotional comfort zones. Comfort zones kept the peace, but they also kept the confusion alive. Confusion thrived in unspoken assumptions, in half-steps, in emotional pauses that never quite turned into conversations. What's changing now is the willingness to replace assumptions with presence. Presence doesn't mean answers to everything. It means showing up honestly in the moment instead of avoiding it. Your soulmate has been noticing how much lighter it feels to imagine a version of this connection where clarity exists, even if it's imperfect. They're realizing that uncertainty has cost more than vulnerability ever could. Vulnerability feels risky, but it's also relieving. There's relief in no longer carrying unspoken feelings alone. Relief in knowing that whatever happens next won't be built on guessing games or emotional limbo. This Valentine isn't about guarantees. It's about direction. Direction away from confusion and toward understanding. Toward conversations that don't dance around the truth. Toward moments that feel grounded instead of ambiguous. Grounded doesn't mean dull. It means real. Real connections don't always feel dramatic, but they feel steady. They don't rely on constant reassurance. They rely on mutual recognition. Recognition is happening now. You might feel it as a subtle shift in how you think about them. Less questioning, more clarity. Less emotional noise, more focus. That doesn't mean everything is resolved. It means your intuition is catching up to what your heart already knew. Your soulmate's intuition is doing the same. They're becoming aware that confusion once served a purpose. It bought time. It delayed risk. It kept things from moving too fast. But it's outlived its usefulness. Now, confusion feels like avoidance. Avoidance doesn't feel aligned anymore. Alignment is what both of you are craving, whether you've named it that way or not. Alignment between feelings and actions. Between intention and expression. Between what's felt and what's acknowledged. This Valentine acts like a mirror. Not a mirror that judges, but one that shows what's been there all along. It reflects the truth that what you share isn't undefined because it lacks meaning. It's been undefined because it carried too much meaning to be handled carelessly. Care is still here. But care is maturing. Mature care doesn't hide behind confusion. It communicates. It clarifies. It respects both hearts involved enough to stop leaving things in limbo. That doesn't mean there won't be tenderness or uncertainty. It means uncertainty won't be used as a shield anymore. Your soulmate is preparing for that shift internally. Preparing to speak with more honesty. Preparing to listen without defensiveness. Preparing to accept whatever clarity brings, even if it requires adjustment. Adjustment is easier than stagnation. Stagnation is what confusion creates when it lingers too long. It keeps things emotionally suspended. It prevents growth. It drains energy. Energy is returning now. You might feel it as motivation to stop overthinking. As a desire to engage more authentically. As a quiet confidence that whatever happens next, it will be truer than what came before. This Valentine isn't promising a perfect outcome. It's promising an honest one. Honesty doesn't guarantee ease, but it guarantees integrity. Integrity is what allows connections to evolve instead of erode. Your soulmate values that now more than ever. They're tired of half-feelings and half-truths. Tired of carrying clarity internally while projecting uncertainty externally. Tired of confusing silence with safety. Safety doesn't come from silence. It comes from trust. Trust that both of you can handle the truth. Trust that clarity won't destroy what confusion protected. Trust that whatever emerges will be real enough to stand on. That trust is forming now. Slowly. Quietly. Intentionally. This Valentine becomes a turning point not because of a grand gesture, but because of a shared readiness. A readiness to let confusion end its role and let understanding take its place. Understanding doesn't erase the past confusion. It contextualizes it. It honors the care and caution that existed, while also acknowledging that it's time to move forward differently. Forward doesn't have to mean fast. It means honest. As this Valentine approaches, the confusion that once felt overwhelming starts to feel unnecessary. Not because it was wrong, but because its job is done. It kept things safe long enough for both of you to grow into a place where clarity can exist without fear. That's what's ending. Not the connection. Not the feeling. But the confusion that stood between two people who were ready to see each other clearly. This Valentine doesn't change everything overnight. It changes the way you stand in what already exists. And that change is quieter, deeper, and far more powerful than confusion ever was. It doesn't come as a sudden realization this time. It arrives as a calm certainty that settles in your chest, the kind that doesn't need reassurance to stay. This Valentine isn't just ending confusion through words or gestures. It's ending it because both of you are finally standing in the same emotional place, even if neither of you announced it out loud. Something inside has aligned. For a long time, the uncertainty lived in the space between what was felt and what was expressed. Not because either of you was dishonest, but because timing, fear, and self-protection kept slowing everything down. That space became familiar. Almost comfortable in its own frustrating way. You learned how to function inside it. How to read between lines. How to interpret silences. But familiarity doesn't mean fulfillment. What's happening now is a quiet rejection of that old rhythm. The back and forth uncertainty no longer feels like something to manage. It feels like something to move beyond. Not with force. With intention. On the other side of this connection, there's been a lot of internal reflection. Nights where thoughts looped back to the same realization. Pretending not to know has become harder than acknowledging the truth. Avoiding clarity has started to feel heavier than facing it. That weight matters. It's the weight that tells you something is ready to change. This Valentine holds that readiness. Not in a dramatic, movie scene way, but in a grounded, human one. The kind where clarity doesn't explode into the room, but quietly takes a seat and stays. There's also been an emotional reckoning. A recognition that confusion was once useful. It protected feelings when vulnerability felt unsafe. It allowed distance when closeness felt risky. It created room to breathe when emotions threatened to overwhelm. But protection can turn into limitation if it lasts too long. That's been felt deeply. The emotional holding pattern has started to feel restrictive instead of safe. Like standing still for so long that movement feels unfamiliar, even though it's necessary. Movement doesn't have to be rushed. It just has to be honest. This Valentine represents honesty catching up with emotion. Not perfection. Not certainty about every future detail. Just truth replacing ambiguity. There's an understanding forming that confusion didn't mean lack of connection. It meant depth without direction. Feeling without articulation. Care without clarity. Now, direction is beginning to emerge. You may notice this as a shift in how you think about the connection. Less spiraling. Less questioning every small interaction. More acceptance of what's already been proven through consistency, care, and emotional presence. Consistency is hard to fake. It shows up in patterns. In how someone stays, even when things feel unresolved. In how attention doesn't disappear just because answers haven't arrived yet. In how respect remains intact even in moments of uncertainty. Those patterns have been noticed. On the other side, there's been a realization that clarity doesn't automatically lead to loss. That was a fear for a long time. The belief that naming feelings would somehow destroy them, or that defining the connection would strip it of its safety. That belief is loosening. Safety is no longer being confused with silence. Silence once felt protective. Now it feels incomplete. This Valentine isn't about filling the silence with noise. It's about replacing it with understanding. Understanding that whatever exists between you has already survived confusion, distance, hesitation, and time. That says something. It says the connection isn't fragile. It's been patient. Patience often gets mistaken for uncertainty, but patience has its own strength. It waits because it believes something is worth waiting for. And that belief has been present, even when neither of you said it directly. What's changing now is the willingness to trust that belief. Trust doesn't mean blind optimism. It means allowing yourself to acknowledge what's already real without trying to control how it unfolds. Control created confusion. Letting go of control creates space. Space for conversations that don't feel forced. Space for honesty that doesn't feel like pressure. Space for feelings to exist without being dissected endlessly. This Valentine carries that space. You might feel it as a softening. Less emotional tension. Less internal debate. More calm acceptance of what is. That doesn't mean everything is solved. It means the emotional environment has shifted. Environments matter. They determine whether growth feels possible or threatening. Right now, growth feels possible. There's also been a quiet acceptance that clarity doesn't mean everything becomes easy. It just means it becomes real. Real conversations can be uncomfortable. Real feelings can be messy. Real connections require presence, not perfection. That's being understood now. The confusion that once blurred everything is starting to lift, not because someone suddenly decided to be brave, but because both of you have grown into a place where bravery feels less terrifying. Growth happened in the waiting. It happened while you were questioning. While you were holding back. While you were trying to understand your own feelings before risking someone else's. None of that time was wasted. It prepared you for this moment. This Valentine isn't asking you to forget the confusion. It's asking you to see it for what it was, a phase, not a foundation. The foundation has always been something else. Mutual respect. Emotional awareness. Care that didn't disappear even when clarity was missing. That foundation is solid. Now it's ready to support something clearer. You may sense a shift in how communication feels. Even small exchanges might carry more ease. Less overthinking. Less wondering what something means. More trust in what's already been shown through action. Actions tell the truth when words hesitate. That truth is becoming harder to ignore. There's also a sense that whatever needs to be said will be said in its own time, without forcing it. Not because it's being avoided, but because it's being approached with care. Care has been the consistent thread through everything. Care is why confusion existed in the first place. Care is why it lasted as long as it did. And care is why it's ending now, rather than being allowed to erode what exists. Erosion happens when things stay unclear too long. That's being prevented now. This Valentine acts like a natural checkpoint. A moment where both of you pause and realize that staying in confusion no longer feels aligned with who you've become. Alignment matters more than certainty. Alignment is what allows two people to move forward without forcing the same pace or the same words. It allows understanding to develop organically. That's what's happening. You don't need to brace yourself for a dramatic shift. The change is already in motion. It's subtle, but it's steady. Confusion is losing its grip because it no longer fits the emotional reality. Reality has changed. What once felt unclear now feels familiar in a different way. Not because it's undefined, but because it's recognized. Recognition brings calm. Calm doesn't mean the absence of emotion. It means emotions are no longer fighting each other. This Valentine brings that calm into focus. It doesn't demand declarations or decisions. It invites presence. It invites honesty. It invites both of you to stop hiding behind uncertainty and simply stand in what already exists. Standing there might feel vulnerable. But it also feels true. Truth doesn't need constant validation. It doesn't need to be dramatic. It just needs to be acknowledged. That acknowledgement is happening now. Confusion isn't being pushed away aggressively. It's being outgrown. Outgrown by two people who finally trust themselves enough to let clarity exist. This Valentine doesn't promise perfection. It promises relief. Relief from guessing. Relief from emotional limbo. Relief from pretending not to know what you already feel. And that relief doesn't come from someone else fixing things. It comes from alignment returning. From honesty replacing hesitation. From clarity gently taking the place of confusion. That's how this Valentine ends the uncertainty. Not with noise. But with truth quietly finding its place and staying there. It unfolds without an announcement, almost the way dawn arrives before you realize night has loosened its grip. This part of the story isn't marked by a clear moment you can point to. It's marked by a gradual easing, a sense that something which once felt tangled is beginning to straighten itself out from the inside. What's different now is not the feeling itself, but how it's being held. For a long time, the confusion lived because both of you were trying to protect something fragile. You were protecting yourselves, yes, but you were also protecting the connection from being mishandled. That protection created pauses, delays, half-movements. It felt safer to stay in between than to risk stepping fully into clarity. Now that in-between space feels less like safety and more like weight. There's been a quiet realization on the other side of this connection that staying unsure requires more energy than being honest. It takes effort to keep wondering. It takes effort to keep interpreting signals. It takes effort to pretend not to notice patterns that have already revealed themselves. Effort like that becomes exhausting. That exhaustion has been building, slowly, patiently, until it reached a point where something had to give. What's giving now isn't the connection. It's the resistance to seeing it clearly. Seeing clearly doesn't mean knowing every outcome. It means acknowledging what's already true. What's already true is that the emotional bond hasn't faded despite time, pauses, or unanswered questions. It's remained steady in the background, shaping how both of you think, feel, and respond even when you try to focus elsewhere. That steadiness matters. It's hard to ignore something that stays consistent without demanding attention. Consistency has a way of speaking louder than dramatic gestures ever could. This Valentine energy is amplifying that awareness. Not in a loud, sentimental way, but in a grounded, reflective one. It's creating a moment where both of you are more honest with yourselves than usual. Honesty has been the missing piece. Not honesty about feelings alone, but honesty about fear. Fear of getting it wrong. Fear of opening something you couldn't easily close again. Fear of discovering that clarity might change things permanently. Permanent change is intimidating. It asks you to let go of the option to retreat into ambiguity whenever things feel intense. It asks you to stand somewhere solid, even if that solidity feels unfamiliar at first. Unfamiliar doesn't mean unsafe. That's a lesson being learned now. The confusion didn't exist because either of you lacked emotional depth. It existed because there was too much depth and not enough trust in how to navigate it. Trust in yourselves. Trust in timing. Trust that clarity wouldn't automatically lead to loss. That trust is forming now. You might feel it as a subtle calm replacing the constant mental back and forth. The questions don't disappear overnight, but they lose their urgency. They stop demanding immediate answers. They become observations instead of anxieties. That shift is important. When questions turn into observations, it means you're no longer fighting reality. You're allowing it to be what it is while you understand it more fully. Understanding takes time. This part of the journey is about that time being used differently. Instead of time being spent in doubt, it's being spent in awareness. Instead of replaying conversations, there's more presence in the moment. Instead of scanning for signs, there's more trust in what's already been shown. Trust changes everything. It softens how you interpret silence. It steadies how you respond to uncertainty. It allows space for conversations to arise naturally instead of being forced by impatience. On the other side, there's a growing acceptance that clarity doesn't have to arrive all at once. It can come in layers. First, clarity about feelings. Then clarity about intentions. Then clarity about next steps, when the time is right. Rushing those layers would distort them. That's why there's patience now where there used to be tension. Patience doesn't mean passivity. It means confidence that things don't need to be rushed to be real. It means trusting that if something matters, it won't disappear just because it's allowed to unfold slowly. That trust is new. It didn't exist in the same way before because fear was louder then. Fear disguised itself as logic, as caution, as practicality. It said, don't assume, don't hope, don't step too far. Fear is quieter now. Not gone, but quieter. It's being replaced by a deeper sense of emotional maturity. A recognition that avoiding discomfort doesn't actually protect you from pain, it just postpones it. And postponing pain often makes it heavier when it finally arrives. Facing truth early, even gently, prevents that buildup. This Valentine period is acting like a natural pause where both of you are taking inventory. Not of mistakes, but of truths. What has stayed? What has grown? What has resisted fading despite confusion? Those questions have answers now. The answers don't come as words yet. They come as feelings that no longer need to justify themselves. They come as a sense of rightness when you imagine clarity instead of ambiguity. Rightness is a quiet guide. It doesn't shout directions. It nudges. You might notice that your emotional reactions are less extreme now. Less swinging between hope and doubt. More balanced. That balance isn't indifference. It's stability. Stability makes room for real communication. When emotions settle, words have space to form without being driven by anxiety. Conversations that once felt too risky begin to feel possible, not because fear vanished, but because it no longer controls the narrative. Narratives are changing now. The old narrative said, it's complicated, it's unclear, it's uncertain. The new one says, it's meaningful, it's evolving, it's real even if it's not fully defined yet. That shift reframes everything. It reframes past hesitation as care instead of confusion. It reframes silence as caution instead of absence. It reframes waiting as preparation instead of avoidance. Preparation for what? Preparation for honesty that doesn't feel forced. For clarity that doesn't feel like pressure. For connection that doesn't rely on guessing games. This part of the story isn't about a dramatic turning point. It's about readiness settling in quietly. Readiness to stop pretending the confusion was permanent. Readiness to trust emotional consistency over temporary uncertainty. Readiness to let understanding replace overthinking. Overthinking was a coping mechanism. It kept emotions busy so they wouldn't spill over. But busy doesn't mean resolved. It just means occupied. Resolution begins with acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is happening now on both sides, even if it hasn't been spoken out loud yet. And acknowledgement changes how you carry the connection. It feels lighter, not because it's less important, but because it's no longer being resisted. Resistance was heavy. Letting go of resistance frees energy. That energy is now available for presence, for warmth, for genuine curiosity instead of guarded observation. Curiosity feels different from anxiety. Anxiety wants certainty immediately. Curiosity wants understanding over time. Curiosity is what's replacing anxiety now. You might feel more open to whatever clarity brings, instead of bracing for it. That openness doesn't mean you know what will happen. It means you trust yourself to handle whatever does. Self-trust is essential here. Without it, clarity feels threatening. With it, clarity feels grounding. This Valentine energy is strengthening that self-trust. It's reminding both of you that you've already navigated uncertainty without falling apart. That you've already grown through confusion without losing yourselves. That resilience matters. It proves that clarity won't break what confusion couldn't. In fact, it will likely strengthen it. Strength doesn't come from avoiding difficult conversations. It comes from approaching them when you're emotionally ready to listen, not just speak. Listening is becoming easier now. There's less defensiveness. Less need to be right. More willingness to understand. Understanding doesn't mean agreement on everything. It means respect for the truth as it is, not as you wish it to be. Respect is replacing projection. Projection once filled the gaps left by silence. Now there are fewer gaps, because awareness is filling them instead. This part of the journey feels quieter than you expected it to. Not explosive. Not dramatic. But deeply stabilizing. Stability is underrated. It's what allows connections to move from emotional uncertainty into emotional safety. Safety doesn't mean predictability. It means trust that honesty won't destroy what exists. That trust is what this Valentine is really about. Not romance as an idea, but connection as a lived experience. One that has survived confusion and is now ready to move beyond it. Beyond doesn't mean forgetting. It means integrating. Integrating the lessons learned while things were unclear. Integrating the patience you both practiced. Integrating the care that kept things intact even when direction was missing. Those things don't disappear with clarity. They become strengths. This part of the story is where that transformation is happening. Quietly, steadily, without needing to announce itself. You don't have to force anything right now. You don't have to chase certainty or demand answers. The confusion is already loosening its hold because it no longer fits who you've both become. That's how this phase works. Not by pushing confusion away, but by outgrowing it. And what grows in its place isn't pressure or expectation. It's understanding. Understanding that whatever comes next will be built on something real, something patient, something honest. That's why this Valentine matters. Not because it changes everything in one moment. But because it marks the point where confusion stops being the center of the story, and truth quietly takes its place. It begins to feel less like a question and more like a shared awareness that has finally stopped resisting itself. Not because everything has been said, but because something important no longer needs to hide behind uncertainty. This phase doesn't arrive with urgency. It arrives with steadiness, the kind that lets you breathe without wondering what you're standing on. The confusion that once felt overwhelming now feels dated. Not wrong. Just outdated. There was a time when not knowing felt safer than knowing. When keeping things undefined felt like protection. But protection has a lifespan. When it stays too long, it stops protecting and starts limiting. That's what's being felt now. A subtle but undeniable sense that staying confused would require more effort than moving forward with clarity. Clarity doesn't feel sharp anymore. It feels gentle. That gentleness comes from growth that happened quietly while both of you were figuring yourselves out. While you were learning what you needed, what you feared, what you were no longer willing to repeat. None of that time was wasted. It shaped this moment. What's different now is that the confusion no longer defines the connection. It doesn't frame every thought or color every interaction. It's still remembered, but it's no longer in control. Control has shifted inward. Instead of trying to manage outcomes, there's a stronger sense of self-trust. A trust that whatever truth exists can be handled with care. That conversations won't automatically destroy what's been built. That honesty doesn't have to mean chaos. That trust wasn't always there. It was built slowly, through consistency. Through noticing what stayed even when things were unclear. Through realizing that attention didn't disappear when answers were missing. Through seeing that respect remained intact even when emotions were complicated. Those observations changed everything. They replaced fear with evidence. Evidence that this connection isn't fragile. That it doesn't crumble under ambiguity. That it has a core strong enough to support clarity now. This Valentine energy has acted like a natural checkpoint, not forcing decisions, but inviting reflection. Reflection on what has been endured, what has been learned, and what no longer fits. What no longer fits is pretending. Pretending not to care as much as you do. Pretending uncertainty is permanent. Pretending silence is neutral. Those pretenses have grown uncomfortable because they no longer align with reality. Reality feels clearer now. Clearer in the sense that feelings don't need to justify themselves anymore. They don't need to be analyzed endlessly to be valid. They simply exist, steady and present. That presence is grounding. It anchors you in the moment instead of pulling you into hypothetical futures or imagined outcomes. It brings focus back to what's actually happening instead of what might happen. What's actually happening is a shift toward emotional maturity. Maturity doesn't mean everything is resolved. It means you're no longer running from unresolved things. It means you can sit with uncertainty without letting it define you. It means you can acknowledge feelings without demanding immediate answers. That's a big change. There was a time when ambiguity felt like a threat. When not knowing felt destabilizing. Now, not knowing feels tolerable because you trust the process that led you here. Process matters more than speed. Speed creates decisions. Process creates understanding. Understanding is what's taking root now. You might notice that interactions feel more natural. Less guarded. Less weighted with unspoken expectations. Even silence feels different. It no longer feels loaded with questions. It feels spacious. Space allows honesty to breathe. In that space, there's room for conversations to arise organically. Not because they're overdue, but because they're ready. Readiness doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up as calm. Calm is present now. Not because everything is perfect, but because the emotional environment has stabilized. The turbulence created by constant questioning has settled. In its place is a quiet confidence that whatever needs to be addressed will be addressed when it's time. Timing feels more intuitive now. Before, timing was something to be strategized, controlled, or waited out anxiously. Now, it feels like something to be trusted. That trust comes from experience, from seeing that rushing clarity would have been premature before. Premature clarity can do damage. It can force definitions that don't fit. It can create pressure where patience is needed. It can turn curiosity into expectation. That's why confusion existed as long as it did. It wasn't a failure. It was a buffer. Now that buffer isn't needed. What's replacing it is a sense of alignment. Alignment between what's felt and how it's being carried. Alignment between intention and behavior. Alignment between inner truth and outer presence. Alignment feels like relief. Relief from having to constantly interpret. Relief from emotional limbo. Relief from the mental gymnastics of trying to understand something that's already clear in its own way. That relief doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with peace. Peace doesn't mean stagnation. It means movement without friction. You might feel more open now. More willing to engage without bracing. More curious about what clarity could bring instead of fearing it. Fear has softened. It hasn't vanished completely, but it's no longer running the show. It's being acknowledged without being obeyed. That's a sign of growth. Growth always changes the relationship you have with fear. Instead of letting fear dictate avoidance, it becomes information. A signal to move thoughtfully, not to stop moving entirely. Thoughtfulness is guiding things now. Thoughtfulness in how feelings are considered. In how words are chosen. In how silence is respected rather than misinterpreted. Respect has become central. Respect for the connection. Respect for individual processes. Respect for the fact that clarity doesn't look the same for everyone at the same time. That respect creates safety. Safety isn't about certainty. It's about knowing that honesty won't be punished. That vulnerability won't be exploited. That questions can exist without causing rupture. That safety is being felt now. It's subtle, but it's real. You might notice that your emotional energy feels more available. Less consumed by overthinking. Less drained by uncertainty. That energy is now free to be present, to notice, to connect. Connection feels different when it's not fighting confusion. It feels lighter. More grounded. Less performative. Performing emotional neutrality was exhausting. Now there's permission to be real, even if real is still evolving. Evolving doesn't mean unstable. It means alive. Alive connections shift, grow, adapt. They don't freeze in uncertainty. They don't rely on avoidance to survive. This Valentine marks the moment where avoidance stops being necessary. Not because someone demanded clarity, but because both of you are ready to handle it. Handling clarity doesn't mean everything becomes simple. It means it becomes honest. Honesty is what allows a connection to move forward without losing its integrity. Integrity has been present all along. It showed up in patience, in consistency, in care that didn't disappear even when direction was unclear. That integrity is now becoming visible. Visible not in grand gestures, but in emotional steadiness. In the absence of panic. In the presence of trust. Trust that whatever happens next will be real. Real doesn't mean perfect. It means true. This phase of the story isn't about defining labels or predicting outcomes. It's about acknowledging that the confusion that once dominated the connection no longer fits. It has served its purpose. It protected growth when growth needed time. Now growth is ready to stand on its own. Standing doesn't require rushing. It requires balance. Balance is what's being found now. Between care and courage. Between patience and honesty. Between feeling and expression. That balance wasn't possible before. Now it is. You don't need to do anything dramatic in this moment. You don't need to force conversations or demand answers. The confusion is already loosening because it no longer aligns with where you both are emotionally. Alignment does the work quietly. Quiet work lasts. This Valentine doesn't erase the past confusion. It reframes it. It shows it as part of the journey, not a flaw in it. That reframing changes how you carry everything that came before. Instead of questioning why it took so long, there's understanding of why it had to. That understanding brings compassion. Compassion for yourself. Compassion for the other person. Compassion for the timing that shaped this connection. Compassion softens judgment. Without judgment, there's room for truth to exist without fear. That's the environment now. An environment where clarity can enter gently, without pressure, without drama, without force. Clarity doesn't need to shout. It just needs space. Space has been created. And in that space, confusion is naturally fading, not because it was wrong, but because it's no longer needed. What replaces it isn't certainty about every detail. It's confidence in the foundation. A foundation built on patience, care, and emotional honesty. That foundation can support whatever comes next. Whatever comes next will not be built on guessing. It will be built on understanding. That's what makes this Valentine different. Not the date. Not the symbolism. But the emotional readiness that has finally caught up with the connection itself. And that readiness doesn't need to be announced. It's already here, steady and undeniable, quietly reshaping the story from the inside out. It arrives in a way that almost surprises you, not because it's dramatic, but because it's calm. This part of the story doesn't carry urgency or emotional spikes. It carries a sense of quiet recognition, the kind that settles in your body before it reaches your thoughts. You don't feel like something is about to happen. You feel like something already has. There's a difference. Before, everything felt suspended, like a breath held too long. Every interaction carried an undercurrent of wondering. Every silence felt loaded. Even moments of closeness came with an invisible question attached. That question shaped how you showed up, how much you revealed, how carefully you moved. Now, that question feels less central. Not because answers have been spoken, but because the emotional truth no longer depends on them. What's changed is the internal posture. There's less leaning forward, less waiting for proof, less scanning for signs. Instead, there's a grounded awareness that whatever this connection is, it has already shown its weight through time and consistency. Consistency teaches lessons words can't. It teaches you what stays. It teaches you what doesn't disappear when things get complicated. It teaches you what remains present even when clarity is delayed. Those lessons have landed now. They've reshaped how you interpret everything. Silence no longer feels like distance. It feels like space. And space doesn't automatically mean absence. Sometimes it means respect for process, for timing, for the fact that not everything needs to be spoken immediately to be real. That understanding brings relief. Relief from emotional vigilance. Relief from constant interpretation. Relief from needing reassurance to feel steady. Steadiness is the key word here. This phase feels steady because it's no longer fueled by uncertainty. It's fueled by acceptance. Acceptance of what is. Acceptance of what has been shown. Acceptance of the fact that this connection has depth regardless of how neatly it's been defined. Definition used to feel urgent. Now it feels secondary. Not unimportant, but no longer the emotional anchor. The anchor has shifted inward. You're anchored in your own clarity, your own awareness of what feels aligned and what doesn't. Alignment has become non-negotiable. That's another quiet shift. You're no longer willing to carry confusion that contradicts your emotional truth. You're no longer willing to minimize what you feel just to keep things comfortable. Comfort without honesty has lost its appeal. Honesty doesn't feel dangerous anymore. It feels necessary. Necessary for growth. Necessary for peace. Necessary for authenticity. This doesn't mean everything is suddenly spoken or resolved. It means the resistance to truth has dissolved. It means when honesty arrives, it will be met with openness rather than fear. Fear used to dominate. Fear of losing what existed. Fear of changing the dynamic. Fear of discovering that clarity might bring endings instead of beginnings. That fear has softened because you've realized something important: uncertainty was already shaping things. Avoiding clarity didn't freeze the connection. It just kept it in a holding pattern. Holding patterns are exhausting. You feel that exhaustion lifting now. Not all at once, but steadily. You're no longer emotionally tired in the same way. There's more energy available for presence, for warmth, for genuine engagement. Presence changes how connection feels. When you're present, you're not rehearsing outcomes. You're not bracing for disappointment. You're not trying to protect yourself from imagined futures. You're just here. Here is where truth lives. This Valentine period has acted like a mirror. It hasn't shown you what you want to see. It's shown you what is. And what is feels less confusing than you expected. It feels human. Human connections aren't always neat. They don't follow clean timelines. They don't announce milestones perfectly. They grow through pauses, missteps, hesitations, and realizations. This connection has grown that way. That growth is now visible in how you carry it. There's less urgency to define and more confidence in experiencing. Less need to label and more willingness to feel. Feeling no longer feels risky. It feels grounding. Grounding comes from knowing yourself better. From understanding your patterns, your boundaries, your needs. You've learned what you're willing to wait for and what you're not. You've learned the difference between patience and self-abandonment. That distinction matters. Patience feels calm. Self-abandonment feels anxious. You're no longer anxious. You're attentive. Attentiveness allows you to notice subtle shifts. Shifts in tone. Shifts in energy. Shifts in how interactions land emotionally. Those shifts tell you more than dramatic declarations ever could. And those shifts are happening. You may notice a different ease in communication. Even when conversations are simple, they feel more connected. Even when there's silence, it feels intentional instead of avoidant. Intentionality is new here. Before, things happened reactively. Now there's a sense of choice. Choice in how you respond. Choice in how much you invest emotionally. Choice in whether you lean in or pause. Choice brings agency. Agency restores balance.
Consistency show up quietly. It show up in presence. It follow through. In emotional availability that doesn't disappear when thing feels real. That availability changes how you trust. Trust is no longer something you are waiting to feel. It's something you are practicing naturally. Practicing trust doesn't mean ignoring doubt. It means not letting doubt dominate. That's maturity. Maturity isn't about having answers. It's about being able to hold question without panic. Panic is gone. In its place is curiosity. Curiosity about the clarity night bring. Curiosity about how honesty could deepen what already exists. Curiosity feels lighter than fear. It opened instead of closing. This part of the story feels open, not unresolved, but open-ended in the healthy way. Like a chapter that doesn't need to rush to its conclusion because the foundation is solid. Solid foundation doesn't crumble under pressure. They support growth. Growth is what's happening now. Growth is emotional self-awareness. Growth is communication readiness. Growth is the ability to sit with vulnerability without needing to escape it. Vulnerability no longer feel like exposure. It feel like alignment. Alignment between what you feel and how you live. You are no longer accepting confusion as a permanent condition. That's the turning point. Turning point don't always feel dramatic. Sometimes they feel like relief, like finally setting something down. You have set it down now, not because you gave up, but because you grew. Grew into a place where clarity isn't threatening, where honesty isn't disobliging, where connection doesn't need to hide behind uncertainty to survive. The Valentine isn't pushing anything forward aggressively. Settling doesn't mean stagnation. It means things are finding their natural position. Natural position feel right without effort. You are not forcing an understanding anymore. You are allowing it to arrive organically. Organic clarity lasts. It's no build on pressure or fear. Those elements are present now. Don't need to anything differently right now. You don't need to initiate heavy conversation or demand answers. Force was never the answer here. Timing was timing was caught up. This part of the journey feels like standing on steady ground after a long period of balancing on uneven terrain. Stability allows perspective. Perspective allows understanding. Understanding dissolves confusion naturally. That's what happening now. Not an ending, not an beginning, but a deepening. A deepening of clarity, a deepening of trust, a deepening of connection, emotional truth. This phase doesn't need validation. It doesn't need explanation. It doesn't need to prove itself. It simply is, and that's what make it powerful. Because when something feels this grounded, it doesn't need to convince you. You already know. That's the story ends here. I hope you enjoy this story. If you enjoy, drop a comment, like this video, and subscribe to this channel for upcoming videos, upcoming story.